After the rain had passed, the sun finally came out, and there was a crowd of people flocking into the baseball field. Today was the Thanksgiving Day, and there was the big game playing. Excitement buzzed between the fans of both teams, but for many of them, they didn't have the money to buy the tickets. And so they decided that the best method to see the game without having to pay was to climb a building. Many climbed the building, and it was indeed a great view to the game. However, they didn't know that the building's roof structure was not able to hold that many people, and without any notice, hundreds of people were sent plummeting down. This building was a glassblowing company, and because of this accident, many lives were lost. Some were burned alive, some were crushed beneath another, and many passed away from injuries. Today we're talking about the accident that killed 23 people, also known as the Thanksgiving Day accident.
Due by 11:59.
Hi everyone, welcome to Due at 11:59. My name is Susie.
My name is Thomas.
And today you are joining us for our 1 a.m., almost 2 a.m. story podcast.
So you might be getting a little bit of the random 2 a.m. conversations coming in, you know?
Maybe. Today was Thanksgiving Day. It was November 29th, 1900. Is that right? 1900 or 19,000?
1900.
1,000. Yeah. Okay.
19,000.
The whole town was excited. The town of San Francisco. Everyone gathered at the field at the 16th and Folsom Street, which was located in Mission District. I mean, everyone was excited, especially because it was Thanksgiving and it was the big game. So the big game was a football game between California Berkeley Golden Bears and the Stanford Cardinal. The two teams has been playing against each other for many years now, and it became a tradition for the city, if not the whole nation, to see the game. As popularity grew with the game, profits also grew as well, in addition to the rivalry between the two. This game was the 10th game between the Bears and the Cardinals, and fans were riled up, especially with the history of the previous games that they've played with each other. San Francisco Bulletin reported, Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and bright, and a fairer day could never have been desired by the veriest of football enthusiasts. In this game, it was reported that it had the largest crowd in the west of San Francisco so far. Even with that rain in the morning, the sun came and more people were persuaded to go. At 10:30 in the morning, fans began to fill the stand, and it was estimated that 19,000 people attended this game, which is the largest it has ever been during that time. Majority of the residents at Mission District were not able to pay for the admissions ticket. Majority of the residents there were Irish and German working class families, and so they either did not want to pay for it or were not able to afford the tickets. In addition to that, majority of the people that wanted to go, that were not able to go, were young men, like kids. Even with the high admissions, the men and the young men or young kids were determined to see the game. And they were really excited for this game, especially because, again, it has a long history of rivalry. And so the men looked around and just scanned to see for what would let them have the best view of the game without having to pay. They saw a building that would allow them to see the game. The men began running across to that building and sneaked into the property before the kickoff. It was estimated that 300 to 500 men decided to climb the building, and for them to climb the building, they first had to jump over the fence, and then they had to sneak past security, and then finally they would climb the building with the ladder that was by the building side, and then finally they were able to sit on the metal roof. This building was a glass-blowing factory. So we're going to talk about this kid. His name was Herman Goering. I might have mispronounced his last name. So Herman Goering was 11 at this time, and he attended Mission Grammar School. Like the other people, he really wanted to see the game. At first, he attempted to crawl under the fence to get into the field. However, he was quickly chased away. And so, he climbed the water tower between 14th and Folsom Street, but the view was obstructed. Finally, he saw a bunch of men just walking towards a specific district, and so he decided to follow them. He joined the crowd and climbed the glassblowing building. So let's talk about this building. So it was a 4-story factory, and it sat directly across the stadium between Folsom and Harrison on 15th Street. It was a perfect location to view the game. The thing about this was that the contractors were rushed to complete the building and the project before the official event, and the primary constructions for this building in support was wood. Now, the company was also in the process of adding a new building to the plant, and the addition was just a week away. Inside the buildings were a bunch of brick furnaces, which were fired up more than a week ago to reach the desired temperature of 3,000. With this temperature, it would allow the employees in the company to do their formal operation, which was to make glass, bottles, jars, and pretty much anything with high heat. So a furnace is pretty much like an oven, I like to think. It's a large brick enclosed box which is used to melt and mold glass. It's white and extremely hot inside, and has 15 tons of molten glass as well inside it. It's also taken care by the skeleton crew.
What's the skeleton crew?
I think they were just employees that took care of them.
Okay.
That's their name. It's got a cool name.
Yeah, it is a cool name.
After kickoff, this was around 2:30 p.m., some of the crowds were tense. The California team had just made a bold move into the Stanford's territory. However, some were distracted. Some looked up and counted that there were 400 people up in the roof at the building right across them. Now, many of the people they noticed were near the building's ventilator, which was 72 feet long and 8 feet wide. Wow. They were concerned that something bad was going to happen. I mean, there was just way too many people.
No, there's no way anything bad could happen.
20 minutes after kickoff, everything came to a complete stop, and they heard a loud crash. Now, some people turned to see where the sound came from. The players stood still as well, and all they could hear was the crash and the bird chirpings in the background. What the hell was that noise? Just what happened? Where did that come from? Some people could not see that the glasswork roof had just collapsed. But for the people that did see it, they noticed that the middle of the rooftop was just hollow. The weight was too much to support the people. The people on the roof completely disappeared. Players and audience could hear screaming coming from somewhere, but they just couldn't locate where exactly it was coming from. Now, allegedly, a Berkeley fan shouted, "It's just a job." All eyes returned to the field, and the game continued as if nothing happened.
What is "it's just a job" supposed to mean?
I think it's saying like, oh, they're just doing a job. Like, it's just somebody working. It's nothing to be worried about.
Oh, yeah, sure. That, like, really loud crash that, like, we could
just
hear
a job,
from...
just someone doing their work.
Yeah, it's just a job.
Get back to what you were doing.
Go back to work. Get back. Earn your $1 a day.
The guest cheered once again, and the bands resumed playing their song. Excitements were much louder than the scream. Those who were sitting up in the higher part of the bleachers could see ambulance and lights coming from the police car. However, the information about the accident was slow to spread to other people, and some of the information never even spread to the people who were close to the field. Now, Charles Yodds, I may have mispronounced his name again, was an employee at the glassblowing company. He was just raking the fire inside the furnace that had been heating up for weeks now, when all of a sudden he heard a loud noise coming from up above. And so he looked up, and all he could see was people, human, just falling from the sky. Now,
it's raining, man. Hallelujah, it's raining.
No. That's not nice. Some of the men were falling just feet away from him. And so he quickly moved out of the way before anyone could fall on him. But he noticed that some of the men had fallen on top of the furnace. When they were doing the investigation, it was estimated that the furnace was about 500 degrees. And the men were dropping 50 feet as well.
50 foot straight into
the furnace.
500 degree furnace?
Yeah.
Fuck.
Some of the men who fell were quickly burned alive while they were on the furnace because it was just really hot on the outside. Charles panicked, but he acted quick. He grabbed a poker, which is like a sharp metal with a sharp end at the end, which is usually used for, moving the fire around. And he tried to remove some of the men that were on the furnace, but it was hard.
Do you know how he was trying to do that? Was he trying to use a little hook at the end, drag them down?
Okay, so the article's never gone into specific, but I would assume that either he was grabbing them by their shirt or he was like using it as like a stick, where he points it out to them and then tell them to hold on while he pulls them out.
I had a kind of more messed up vision in my head for a second.
I hope that version isn't true.
Yeah, I thought he was trying to hook onto their bicep and rip them down or something. Or just hook on the skin and rip them down.
I hope not.
Yeah, me too.
Another worker, his name was Clarence Jeter. He was surprised as well when people started falling from the roof, but he acted quickly. He ran to turn off the oil, which was going into the fire to feed it. And so after he turned the machine off, he tried to pull the people off the furnace as well. But even with all that effort, there was just so many people that were falling. Clarence stated, "It was a horrible experience standing there beside a hell pot and seeing humans being roasted to death. Some fell and also ripped the fuel line. And this fuel line had oil in it. And so the hot oil were just spraying at some people, burning them in their skin. Some were lucky enough to hang on the rafter of the roof, and it's a wood slope that is used as a support for the building's roof. One man hung there, clinging on the wood for his dear life. He saw a man that he had been chatting with fall and hit the furnace. He stated he curled up like a worm in that heat. Luckily, the furnace was on the far side of the building that was away from the field, and so majority of the spectators were away from the furnace. However, there was still a 50-foot drop to the floor, and many were killed, being bashed and suffocated by others that were falling on them. Almost all the neighbors close to the factory called the police when they heard the accident. Nearby spectators rushed to the scene and they jumped over the fence and informed the others that they needed to bring anything with wheels so that they could transport those who were injured to the hospital. People brought anything from wagons to butcher's cart to pretty much anything that had wheels. Now, when the rescuers and the firefighters arrived to the scene, all they saw were bodies just scattered all over the factory floor. Some were unconscious and some were conscious. They could hear moaning of men, women, and majority little boys just crying in pain, and they could smell the burning clothes and flesh, and they were lost and confused on what to do because there was just so many people. They don't know how to act in that situation or the best way to approach that situation. But the rescuers would place the victims into the wheel tool or whatever they brought and rush them to the city hospital. Now, when the hospital saw people, a lot of people just being rushed in, they immediately called the doctors and nurses and asked them to come back and to leave their Thanksgiving dinner. The big game came to a result. The Stanford fans celebrated and ran into the field. They won 5-0. And so the fans picked up the players and placed them on their shoulders. They paraded down the Market Street to Palace Hotel. However, at the same time, just a couple blocks down, there was another crowd that was filled with sorrow, distressed, and panic. The police blocked doors to the Southern Pacific Hospital and kept lookers and survivors away from the hospital to try and keep everything organized.
Wait, they're keeping the survivors away from the hospital too?
Yeah. Not like the injured. Like,
Oh,
those who
okay,
were
okay.
severely injured were in the hospital, but those who survived and were deemed not extremely injured away.
No, okay.
The hospital looked like a battlefield. Many young boys were just laying on the hospital floor hallway, crying in pain and calling for their parents. The morgue facility was also a mess. When they saw the coroner deputies delivering bodies in stretchers that were made from pieces of broken off roof, they didn't know what to do. The bodies just kept stacking up, and there were not enough space to store the bodies. And so they were forced to open a morgue that was still under construction. When the celebration was finally over, the city quieted down and the city fell into a mourning. The people that were returning from trips knew that something terrible had happened. 23 people passed away from the accident, and over 100 more were injured. Lawrence Meal was the youngest victim, and he had turned just 9 a month before the game. William Eckfeld was 12 years old at that time, and he was one of the first victims to pass away. His body was extremely disfigured by the accident, and his father had to identify his body by his socks. Hector McNeil was 14 years old at this time, and he was the only son. His mother was a recently widowed, and she had given him money to see the game. He was also a night school student and worked at a dry goods store during the day. William Valencia was 17 years old, and his grandpa was named the same as the nearby Valencia Street. Edgar Flyhaven was a student at Mission Grammar School, and he was also the classmate of Herman Goering. He died in the ambulance while being rushed to the hospital. Meg Van Dyke, he was 46 years old at this time. He worked as a miner. 13 people died that day, and more would pass away from injuries later on. So obviously there was a trial that followed soon after the accident. The factory employees and the police argued that their men did their best to keep the crowd out of the factory and denied allegations that workers offered entrance to the roof for a fee. James Davis was given 6 tickets to the game if he kept people off the roof. I believe he was the owner of the factory or the manager, one of that. According to the treasurer of Associated Students of Stanford University, Henry Taylor, he stated that he gave James Davis 6 tickets to the game if he kept people off the roof. However, some people speculate that James may have turned his head and allowed his freshmen to sell entrance for a fee. A lot of people speculated this because earlier that year, he was on paper for criticizing a glassblower, and he may have wanted to make up for what he had done. Now, according to Goering, he stated that it was like trying to turn back the waves at the beach. The kids kept pouring through the fences, anxious to see the kickoff. And so it appears that because a couple of kids went through the roof, and as more people went in, things got out of control, and so the rushmen could not control the large crowd. Davis and the employees claimed that they had called the police department after things went out of control, but they were transferred to the mission substation instead. The officer at the substation stated and told them to speak to the lieutenant at the game. But when they went over to the field to talk to the lieutenant, they were turned away and denied entrance to the gate. So at first, jurors were keen on blaming the police and stated that they were incompetent. They stated, "It is very strange that the police officials did not detail enough men to the football game to keep people from crowding dangerous places." However, there was not enough evidence to support that it was the factory or the police's fault. Now, 7 days after the accident, they concluded with a final ruling. The jury blamed the people who climbed the factory. This ruling was just 4 days after Fred Lilly, who was 21 years old at this time, became the 22nd victim to pass from the injuries.
Holy shit.
One juror stated, "The deceased had no business being there. No one can be held responsible for their death other than themselves. Yeah, when I read that, I was shocked.
Yeah, what the?
I feel like I get what they were saying, but the way they said it was just so cruel.
Yeah, like I get their point, but the way they said it was really fucked up.
I don't think anyone was at fault, to be honest. Like, nobody knew that the roof was going to collapse.
Yeah.
If they knew, they would not have climbed the roof. And the fact that they came to a conclusion just 7 days after the accident, I feel like they could have done. I feel like they could have done a little bit more investigation. The news report that followed barely covered the accident. They were more focused on the game. For example, the Stanford Daily featured a 1,500-word front-page story about the game, but they did not mention the disaster that was just 200 feet away. However, the New York Times did cover the accident, but it was kind of strange though. The first page was a gruesome detail about the story and the accident, and then when you turn to the next following pages, it was just the typical game stories that you would see in other news articles. The Sequoia was the only student publication at Stanford to address the tragedy. They had a drawing called The Passing of Billy, and it was about a man that loved to smoke and swear, and he also liked to con people too. Now, he was swayed to support Stanford after a Stanford man bought a newspaper from him, and his last words were, "Hurrah for Stanford." So I was interested in this art, but I couldn't find it anywhere when I looked for it. 3 years after the accident, Thomas Pendler, who was 28 years old at this time, passed away from the accident. He had a spinal surgery, also had paralysis, and had to amputate both of his legs because of the accident. And he was the last victim that was recorded, which totaled up to 23 people dying from the accident. The tragedy is forgotten about. There was no statue or pretty much plaque at the site that was, a memorial for them, the victims.
There was just nothing. It was just like they died and
no memorial.
That was it?
Nothing at all.
Wow.
Yeah, in addition to that, there was barely mentions of the accident in history books. I've never read about this. Many of the victims were also buried in the San Francisco cemeteries that was soon abandoned after a regulation was passed to remove graveyards from the cemeteries.
So there was like a city law change, and they just got rid of the graveyard?
Yeah, of victims. So Pendler and Valencia was thankfully placed in the Holy Cross Catholic Cemetery. However, they do not have a headstone because back then families could not afford them. But just within a couple feet of that, there is a small stone with writings that is kind of faded. If you look closely enough, you can see the first initial and the last name for Cornelius McMahon. McMahon?
McMahon.
And he was just 12 years old at this time when he passed away from the accident. So that is the story of the Thanksgiving Day disaster. I hope you guys learned something new, and I hope you guys stay safe.
Please don't climb any glass-blowing factories to see a football game.
Or any building that says don't climb. If there's anything that I might have mistaken or should know, just let me know in the comment. And I will see you guys on the next episode. Bye.
See y'all. Bye.